Hello, I'm Councilmember Bob Blumenfield, and welcome to this virtual presentation town hall about cabin communities. My hope is that today we can help demystify what these cabin communities are and what they are not. To do this, I've enlisted the help of some folks from around the country who have first-hand experience with cabin communities. They can help answer some of the questions that you've submitted. In addition to that, I will provide written answers to all of the questions that have been submitted to my website, and there have been over 200 so far. But using those questions to inform me, I've asked those questions to some of these experts. So we're going to hear today from one of my colleagues, Councilmember Paul Krekorian. He and I went to one of the sites where they're building cabin communities in his district, where you can actually see the cabins that are being built. So we'll show you footage from that. In addition, we're going to speak with Amy King. She is the CEO and founder of a company called Pallet. They are the actual makers of the cabins that we're using in Los Angeles. So she can talk about the design, why they chose to make them the way they've made them. She can also talk about her experience with these cabin communities in other states across the country. In addition, we're going to speak with the former council member Jack Tibbetts, or the current council member Jack Tibbetts in Santa Rosa, where they have put up a cabin community, and they had a real interesting experience with the neighborhood, and they've been able to work all of that out in a positive way, as I understand it. But we're going to hear from him firsthand about that experience in his area. And then we're also going to hear from former Mayor Rusty Bailey from Riverside. And Rusty is actually the one who first introduced me to the idea of cabin communities, or I'd heard about the idea, but I went and took a virtual tour of the cabin community in Riverside a number of months ago. And he's real interesting. He'll talk about the cabin community they have at Riverside. It's been up there for a while, but he actually, when they were getting started and people didn't understand what these cabins were about, he himself slept in that cabin before they even had a cabin community to experience it firsthand. So he'll talk a little bit about that. So there's a lot of questions, but let's just jump right into it and start the interviews. Thank you. I'm here with my council colleague, Paul Krekorian. This is going to be the very first site that stood up of the cabin community. He's actually putting in 3 cabin communities in his district, and along with the 2 that we're doing in my district, the Valley is really leading the way. And so Paul, you're leading the charge here. This is the first one. Tell us a little bit about this location and about what you expect to see.
Projects like this and the projects that you've proposed for your district are the kinds of things that allow us to actually move people out of parks, out of residential areas, out from under freeway overpasses, and into a home where they can stabilize and have access to services and get into a more permanent housing situation.
Paul, how do the neighbors feel about this? How has it been explaining it to folks and are people concerned?
Sure, and like any time that we do anything with infrastructure, housing for the homeless, people always have legitimate questions, legitimate concerns. And here, we're right across the street from the busiest park in my district. A few hundred feet down the road is a relatively brand new luxury apartment building that we just finished not that long ago. So people get concerned.
But residential right across over there.
Yeah, a whole multifamily building neighborhood just a few hundred feet that way. So people have natural concerns. And the way we've addressed that is really by, first of all, identifying with them the magnitude of the existing problem. And when we look at the status quo, nobody thinks that that's acceptable. And then we've actually gone and had folks from the neighborhood tour some of the other bridge home facilities that we've already built so that they can see what's happening there and their fears have not been realized in those places. So once they see that and they see how the operator handles the facility and they see that there aren't people congregating outside, it relieves a lot of that fear. So engaging the neighbors, we got unanimous approval from our neighborhood council here once they saw what it is that we really had in mind to do, and also when they see the benefit that will come to the surrounding community by actually housing people so that they're not living in tents and structures and so on right there in the park, right across the street from you. They're going to be moving people out of that environment and into this regulated, hygienic, clean, safe environment. So far we've put up 185 beds in Bridge Home facilities. This is going to add another 75. We have 2 more with almost 300 total that will be coming after that. So this isn't easy. It's never something that people, want to jump up and applaud about. But I think when they see the progress and they see the impact that it actually has on the streets, people realize that this is the solution that we all need to embrace.
Thank you. Well, I'm here with Amy King, and she is the founder and CEO of Pallet. It's a company that constructs these pallet communities or these cabin communities all over the country. They have an amazing mission to do this. It's not just about making profit for them. They really are focused on how they can really help with homelessness. So Amy, I wanted to just jump right into it. Tell me a little bit about how they work and the construction of the cabins, what amenities they offer, and how they're working in other areas.
We do build these in Washington. One unique thing about us that we like people to know is that our units are actually constructed by people with lived experience in homelessness who are currently or previously homeless themselves. So we are providing jobs to people that are marginalized within our community, and we really value their input in the design. And we know that the design works because they themselves have told us this is what they would have needed as they were exiting homelessness themselves. So that's an important factor that we want people to know. These are panelized. They go together in about 30 minutes with no tools required. Sites go up really fast. We've put sites up in 10 days. We've put sites up overnight. We've had sites go up all over the country. We have them across California. We have a site in Minneapolis now. We have sites in Texas, Washington, Oregon. So I can tell you that the sites that we have built have been wildly successful. They all have, they're at capacity, completely full. So the adoption rate amongst people experiencing homelessness is quite high. They are willing to take our units and utilize that service because it is an individual space where they have a locking door and their own space to engage in recovery and sort of take the next step out of homelessness. And we have never, ever had a neighborhood complaint following the opening of a site, as long as the site is well managed. So all of our sites across the country are managed by a service provider, and we have never had instances of increased crime or issues with people coming out of the sites and going into neighborhoods. We have not had that.
So tell me, I want to hone in on that a little bit. That, we have had concerns from neighbors that these are not designed to be desirable for people living on the streets, that people on the streets are not going to want to stay in their cabin community. They're going to want to walk around the neighborhood, or they're going to leave the cabin community and be back on the streets. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit, has that been your experience, or how has that worked in other places?
Yeah, what we've seen traditionally is the cabin communities become their own little sort of holistic community in and of themselves. So the residents typically find relationship, engage with services and whatnot within that community. Now, whether or not they come and go from that community and how they do that is sort of up to the service provider. So what we typically see is whoever's managing the site will provide transportation services for the residents to get to services, or they'll bring the services to them, which then allows, it doesn't require people to leave the site and wander necessarily, nor do I think that they want to be fair. I think they want their own community. They want to have a space where they can engage with each other and they can have their own space. So they typically stay within that cabin community because they have service providers and food and restrooms and everything that they need on that site. So it actually minimizes the wandering of people experiencing homelessness because their needs are met at the site rather than them wandering around your neighborhood looking for a place to use a restroom or looking for food or whatever. So I think that the cabin communities actually improve that for the neighborhoods. Plus it's nicer to look at than tents. But we've also had great success across all of our sites with people moving on from the cabins, the pallet shelters, to permanent housing. So we've seen that across all of our sites where people, this is the first stepping stone for them. They're coming off the streets, they're getting their own little cabin, and then the cabins are comfortable enough for them to, be out of the elements, have their locking door, have their space, but they're also uncomfortable enough that it motivates them to move on to a permanent housing solution. And that is the goal. That is the end game that we and everyone else, I think, is shooting for. So this just sort of makes it so that you can get people on that progression towards permanent housing. But we have not had issues at any of our sites with residents wandering the neighborhoods that I'm aware of anyway.
Well, you guys make the cabins. Let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of it, literally.
Sure.
What are they made of? Are they warm inside? I know that the ones we have for these cabins will have air conditioning and heating.
Yep.
But tell us a little bit about the actual cabins themselves.
So the ones that are being used in the city of Los Angeles are about 64 square feet. Which is, plenty of room they have a bed inside, they have shelves to store their things, they have electrical panels, heat, air conditioning, as you mentioned. They have basic safety features, like a fire extinguisher, a smoke detector, a CO monitor. So the residents inside are safe and the neighborhood is safe because any issues that might occur, there's going to be alarming, there's going to be smoke alarms, there's going to be fire response, all that kind of stuff. So there's no need to worry about, safety at all. The locking door is a really important feature that I've mentioned a couple times. I think that's a huge benefit to people after they've been living outside to have the safety and security of a locking door where you can sleep at night and not worry about someone coming in on you or your things being stolen. You can bring your things with you and leave them during the day so you can go engage with services or get a job or whatever you need to do. So it's really a benefit for the resident in that way. The units themselves are comprised of a composite material. So it's a fiberglass plastic composite with an insulated core. So they are insulated, they are warm, they are dry, they are safe, they are cleanable, which is really important. So this composite material, as opposed to wood, it's a non-organic material that is mold, mildew, and rot resistant, and also pest resistant. So bed bugs, rats, things like that, they can't nest or get into the unit. So it's a little more hygienic that way. Also with COVID, they are sterilizable and cleanable. So the virus can, remain on surfaces and things like that. You can hose these out, you can bleach them, you can clean them between residents. So you'll be able to cycle multiple residents through and get more response out of a single unit than you would with, say, a wooden tiny home.
Why do you think, why do you think this is an important tool in terms of addressing homelessness as opposed to permanent supportive housing or the various other interventions that are out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be clear, we don't see this as an alternative to permanent housing. We see it as a complement to permanent housing. So we are also general contractors. We build permanent product here in Seattle, both affordable and market rate. And so, we're not competing with ourselves here. We're trying to provide something that is useful and helpful and cost effective in the meantime, while we're waiting for permanent housing to be built. We know how long it takes to get permits, to get construction up in the air. We know that it's expensive. Construction is very expensive right now. So this is meant to be a substitute, a gap filler, until we can get enough permanent housing for people. In the meantime, we don't want people dying on the streets because they don't have a place to go.
If if there's anything you want to say to the community at large, I mean, we have a lot of folks who live very close to where these cabin communities are going to be, and you've seen this happen. What would you say to folks? This is a chance to talk directly to the community.
I think It's from my own personal experience. So my husband and I have been working with individuals exiting homelessness and the criminal justice system directly for the last 6 years. And I can tell you that before this time of doing this work, I grew up in a very privileged community where I did not have access to people that had this experience, and I was scared. I would walk the streets of Seattle and I was scared of the homeless residents on our streets. Since I have started to have a more regular interaction, a personal interaction with the people who work for me, my thinking around people experiencing homelessness and coming out of the criminal justice system has completely changed. And it's all based on my personal experience of interaction with them, listening to them, hearing their stories, understanding how they got to where they are. And I certainly can understand a fear because I was once that person. There will be a fear of the unknown. When you don't know those people, who they are, where they come from, what their intentions are, you're going to be scared of them. I understand that. If you take the time to get to know them and to understand how they got to where they are, you might change your mind about them. And we have never seen in any of the communities that we've set up negative interactions between the local community and the people, the residents in the cabin communities.
Last question, have other cabin communities become a magnet for other encampments to come around it? That's one of the concerns that people have had, is that having the cabin community there, people have friends and relatives who are going to come visit them and then maybe set up camp around there. Has it attracted other encampments to the cabin community?
We've not heard of, so in Sonoma as an example, there has not been camping. There has not been people coming and congregating around the Pallet community at all. I think that has to do with management. So each of our sites, as I mentioned, is managed by a service provider. And usually there is control of who's coming and going from the site, and they don't allow for that additional camping around the site. And if you have enough either Pallet communities or other shelter beds around your city, then there shouldn't be a need for people to camp around that community. They can go to the next, couple streets down and stay in that Pallet community or a different congregate shelter or whatever.
Well, Amy, thank you again. Thank you for working with the city of Los Angeles on this and helping us get these up all over the city. And as you are doing it all over the country to try to alleviate homelessness and create that transition. So thank you for what you're doing and for agreeing to come on. I don't want to call it a show, but this town hall to talk with us and to talk with the community here in the West San Fernando Valley. So thank you again.
My pleasure, absolutely. And if residents have questions and they want to reach out to us directly through our web form, they are welcome to do so.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, now I'm here with Jack Tibbetts. He is a council member in Santa Rosa, California. He also serves as the executive director of the local St. Vincent de Paul chapter, and he helps folks with this cabin community in his district. He was instrumental in opening a cabin community in Santa Rosa. So welcome, Councilmember Tibbetts. Thank you for being here. And I'd love to just hear a little bit about how the cabin community came about in your area and whether or not it's been successful and what some of the big problems have been and whether you've been able to overcome them.
Yeah, thank you, Council Member. I'm really glad to be able to be here and have this conversation with you and share our experience about what we've seen in terms of success over here at the Los Guilicos Village. We started the Los Guilicos Village. It came about in response to a crisis that we were having on the Joe Rodota Trail, which is a park within our community along Highway 12 that runs through Santa Rosa. There was about 380 people living in essentially an ad hoc village that existed there. It was a lot of tents, a lot of, obviously unpermitted, unsafe structures that people had erected, kind of as best they could. And what we were seeing there was a pretty high level of crime. We were seeing significant public health issues. There was actually an outbreak of trench foot, believe it or not, which is an illness that hadn't been seen since World War I. So the Board of Supervisors of the County of Sonoma moved forward with declaring a public health crisis, and they enlisted a number of strategies to provide housing for these folks. They bought a number of houses in neighborhoods throughout the community, but one of the most significant things that they did was started the Los Guilicos Village. The folks who lived in this community of what's called Oakmont, which is a retiree community, it's a 55 and over community. They were really concerned about this village going across the street from them. And I think the general fear that they and everybody around them had was that it was basically going to be this transplanting of this tent community across the street from them. So they had all those concerns about crime, about drug use, about there being sex offenders across the street, you name it, the things that people are typically worried about. But I think also just generally that it was going to be this kind of this eyesore across the street from them being placed over there, and an advisory council with a number of those residents. It's been a huge success ever since. Our housing rate is just hit 30% the other day, and we expect it to go up to 50, 60% within the next 6 months. We've had about 120 people be sheltered in this facility, and I would say we've probably housed now close to 45 in permanent supportive housing by pairing them with housing vouchers. So we're seeing really great success with it. And, I thank you for taking this up in your community as well.
Tell me a little bit about the community advisory committee, because we're starting something like that here for each of the cabin communities in my district. I really want to integrate the community into the decisions and into the process that happens with those cabins, and so that folks have a better understanding and have a stake and can guide it. So tell me, how has that worked in your community with it, and what kinds of things has that committee dealt with, and how have they dealt with them?
Yeah, even though it was somewhat adversarial at first, and even though we still go to these meetings and they still kind of have the way they want things and we have the way that we want things, it's incredibly cordial and collaborative. And one example of that is back in about June, when our red flag warning season was about to happen up here in the North Bay, one of the residents of Oakmont said, "Do you guys have an evacuation plan that you've put in place and that you've practiced? Because aren't you worried about fires?" And I hate to admit it, at the time I wasn't really worried about fires so much because this area had burned 2 years ago. But I thought, you know what, he's flagging a good point. We need to, institute a strong evacuation plan, and we need to practice it. We need to have our residents work with our staff and do a mock drill. And we did that. And through that process, we learned how to have the evacuation infrastructure that would be needed in the event if there was a fire. And you know what? I thank God every day for this guy, because lo and behold, on September 28th, we had the glass fire up here, and a wall of fire raced down this ridge above us, and it burned all around the village. It took down 6 of our village tiny houses, but we were all evacuated safely because of this drill, because of this gentleman, and because of the policy contribution he made on this advisory council. So it's not just political lip service. It's not just doing something to placate the community. It's really, truly is this policy making machine that's made us better.
Yeah, how close is your cabin community to residences, and how has that affected the immediate neighbors?
Well, I would say the nearest residence is probably 200 feet away. The large community of Oakmont is about 300 to 400 feet away.
So that's pretty close. Have you had any bad incidents during your first year of operation?
One thing that is probably important to note is that during our last advisory council meeting, which would be about 11 months since we began, the committee reported to us that as far as they could tell, there were 0 incidents in the Oakmont community relating to Los Guilicos Village, which for us was, a terrific report card. And I think that that's probably something that, your constituents should know as well. As it doesn't mean there won't be, 1 or 2 incidents or something, but these really can be done without a significant impact to a community.
What's the biggest surprise you've had with this cabin community? It's only been up for what, 1.5 years, and I'm sure that it's not all that you expected. What's the biggest surprise you've had?
I am truly surprised, and this isn't. I'm not trying to, paint a rosy picture, but I am truly surprised at how much it means to the people who get to go live there. And I think that can't be understated. We've created a real sense of community with it. We have gardens that people tend. We have kind of a community center where people go and interact, play games, watch movies. But just the ability for somebody to have this little space that is their own, where they can go inside at night and lock the door, or go out during the day, go to a job and, keep their belongings safe behind a locked door, really is a life-changing thing for folks. And I was expecting it to be more of a, okay, this is the place where I am now. This is where the government has put me kind of mentality. I just can't wait to get out into my housing. And people really do want to get into housing that we've seen. We've been working with an incredibly challenged population too. That's something that I didn't mention before, but the folks coming off the Joe Rodota Trail are probably the most challenging subset of our homeless population in Sonoma County that we've been working with. And by that, I mean chronically homeless, really high on the vulnerability index, the VI-SPDAT. So chronic health issues, you name it. But they've been out on the streets a long time, but they just really see it as home. And that really became apparent to me after our evacuation from the glass fire that took out 6 units of the village and closed it down for about 4 weeks. We relocated folks to another part of town. And it was like almost every day they were coming up to me or another member of our staff. And it wasn't, when do we get to go back to our cabin community? When do we get to go back to the village? It was, when do I get to go home? And I just, to me, that was moving. And I think that's what you're going to find that your office is going to be a part of. I hope that, some of the residents surrounding the village where you're going to be putting your cabin community can be part of as well, because we've seen lives change. We've seen almost 45 people, get clean and sober and go into housing. I mean, these are the outcomes we want if we're going to spend all this taxpayer money on homelessness.
Well, thank you. This is really great and really helpful, and I appreciate so much that you're taking the time to do it. And I hope ours is as successful as yours, because it sounds like yours is great. And,
I'm sure it will, and I just want to say thank you, Bob. I know how hard it is to put something in your own district, and there's not enough people in elected office like you.
I'm here with former Mayor Rusty Bailey. He is from Riverside. He actually is the one who really introduced me first to these idea of a cabin community. I went and virtually toured his cabin community a number of months ago. If you could tell us a little bit about what your cabin community, how it got started, and how it's working.
Yeah, certainly. And Councilmember, I just want to give you credit for being a leader, taking on this initiative, this concept, because I know it's not easy. I've been through the same issues of the public. First of all, saying, what are you doing about homelessness? What are you going to do? How are you going to fix this? And so, that basically that's the last 4 years, my second term, 50% of my time, my staff's time, focused on addressing homelessness and finding solutions. And this is a solution. It's not the end all be all, of course, but it is a solution that takes our neighbors without homes off the streets, out of the gutter, and into a safe and dignified living place, shelter. But it's the next step, and then services attached to this, and then hopefully transitional or permanent supportive housing towards self-sufficiency. That is the ultimate goal. And I can tell you already that we have had success in that. And I'm going to cut to the chase, and I'll come back and answer your question a little bit more fully. But from the initial 30 individuals in our Pallet shelter in the village, 15 now have gone on to permanent supportive housing. So 50% success rate of the first 30 cohort that was offered a stay in our community, in our Pallet shelter community. So that's the bottom line up front, that it is successful. People also, as you've heard, say, well, they won't accept services. They won't accept this, no matter what you give them. And that's not true. That is not true. Our Skid Row had about a little over 100 individuals. I know that there's thousands on your Skid Row, but for our case, in our scenario and our data, we surveyed the 100 individuals living in the tents and tarps on Skid Row, and 63 of them accepted services and ended up either going pallet shelter or room key or otherwise. And so that's the false narrative, that they won't accept services is a false narrative. 60% typically, and that's not just in our city, other cities accept services if they are the right fit. And this is a right fit for a first step out of off of Skid Row and into a community that assists our neighbors without homes.
Is there a time limit on your cabin community in terms of how long someone can be there?
The goal is 6 months, to a year, depending on what level of need that the individuals have. But as we, are practicing this, putting this into practice, we have found out that it takes less than a year. Again, 50% that started are already out, and we opened our cabin community last March. So really, that's a little over 6 months. We started seeing individuals up and into the Pallet Shelter Village, and then on to permanent supportive housing.
So have you had any issues with your neighbors for the cabin community? Any problems or any situations we should know about?
No issues with the neighbors in the cabin community village. They actually supported it because it got the neighbors without homes off the street and the trash off the street, and made it a safer environment for their employees to drive through to get to work. There are several businesses with hundreds of employees on Massachusetts Avenue that go to work every day and have seen this for the last couple of years. And so they were in support, actually gave funding towards the cabin community, and continue to help us in the long run.
Now, you yourself slept in the cabin when you first started it. How was that? What tell us a little bit about that experience?
I did. It was cold. It was October, November, December, and I slept there every other night with a week off Thanksgiving, and I had a West Point reunion that I went to, but otherwise I was there about every other night until the city kind of told me, hey, these aren't legal. I think you need to not sleep there anymore. And so they asked me nicely, instead of evicting me or red tagging me, to leave, and I did. But it wasn't before I was able to convince the new city council that we needed to purchase and set up the new cabin community. So I was the only one out there in the parking lot at the time, at the end of October and November, and I didn't have the heat, or I didn't have a heater. I didn't have it connected to electricity because it was an experiment. But it definitely was safe and secure. Any
advice you'd give to the neighborhood that is listening to us talk and is worried about having these cabin communities come in? Any particular words of wisdom that you would give them?
Be a part of the solution and help the city help you to get your neighbors off of the street and out of homelessness. The government can't do it alone. This is a societal issue. This is a whole society issue that we need to come together and row in the same direction. And so this is the first step, and it's a very efficient and effective model, especially when it comes to finance and funding. And so, be part of the solution and help shape the narrative that individuals on the streets do need service and want service and will accept service if you provide the right fit. And this is the right fit for those living on the sidewalks and in the gutters. It's that first step that helps them gain confidence and gain dignity so that they can gain self-sufficiency.
Rusty, thank you again so much for providing your wisdom and expertise, and to I hope in the future you get to come see our cabin communities, to see what you've helped inspire. And we hope that ours is going to be as good as yours in terms of the success rate. And just really appreciate your willingness to talk with us and to offer your advice and experience. So thank you again.
I'll be there, my friend. Godspeed to you.
All right. Well, thank you for watching this presentation, this virtual town hall. I hope that the various speakers that we had were able to demystify some of this and answer a number of your questions. I know that there were a lot of questions asked. We had over 200 questions submitted to my website, and we are going to answer each and every one of those in writing. I thought I'd take a moment, though, to answer a couple of the big ones that a number of you asked, and just to give you some quick answers, and then we'll go into the specifics online about a lot of these. One of the questions you asked was, why here? Why was this site chosen? And first I want to assure you that we tried to look at every underutilized lot in the district. There weren't that many of them, but my team and I, and my team includes me, my staff, our volunteer homeless community action team members, we went to over 60 different property owners of sites that are out there to see if there was if they would be willing to use their land as for a possible homeless intervention. And we scoured all of them. Of all of those properties, there were really only 8 viable locations. And we are using every single one of those locations for a homeless intervention. I should say there are 8 that were viable right now. There may be others that are going to be viable in the future, and we're still having discussions with some property owners. Some of the properties were prohibitively expensive. Some of them, like the old Rocketdyne site, there's environmental problems and you can't legally have people habitating on them. And there are others that may have interventions in the future. But those sites are now being used for not just for cabin communities, but for safe parking and a variety of other interventions. So that's part of it, is all of these sites that were out there. Another question that you all asked had to do with the money, which was, where's the money actually coming from? And that's a great question, because we are at a unique point in time right now where there are a lot of factors that are converging that are not only producing the funds to make this happen, but the impetus as well. So the funds themselves are a combination of city funds, county funds that are coming out of a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, whereby the county has been mandated to provide $300 million, $60 million a year for 5 years to go toward transitional housing, as well as federal funds, COVID money that's unique to this time frame, to be able to get people off the streets because of COVID, money that's potentially partially reimbursable by the feds. So all of these factors have conspired in a way to make the immediacy of now important. And not only that, I mean, the other factor, of course, is the homeless crisis itself. People are dying on the streets in greater numbers. 4 people a day are dying on the streets. It is unconscionable. So we've got to do everything that we can. And all of these other factors that are conspiring, that are allowing us to produce transitional housing at this point, we've got to seize that moment and do what we can do. So that's the timing and where the money is coming from. The last question is, people have asked, what about the legal requirements for environmental review and for public input? Well, while the state passed a law that basically says none of these homeless interventions, including cabin communities, are subject to CEQA or require any public engagement, I'm very serious about public engagement, and have really tried to push that and will push that, because I need and want for this project and these projects to be collaborative with the community, to be something for the betterment of the community in the long run. And I know these are difficult conversations, because I know the first reaction when you see something like this being proposed for your community is concern and fear. But my hope is that these will be ultimately successful, And by successful, what do I mean? I mean, not only will they help produce results, and that clients, the people who were formerly homeless that will be living in these cabin communities, will be transitioning to permanent supportive housing and will be transitioning out of homelessness permanently. But also by success, I mean that these cabin communities will be something that the community, the larger community, will be proud of and not feel as a burden in their community, but feel like they've helped step up to make a difference. And I really do believe that that can happen. And if it isn't happening, if these cabin communities are becoming big problems in our community, I will be the first one to push for their removal. These are temporary cabins. They can go up quickly. They can also go down quickly. But the goal is to make it work. And we can make it work if we work together. And toward that end, for each of the cabin communities in my district, I'm establishing a community cabin committee, or cabin community committee, I don't know, something like that. It's going to have alliteration. It's going to be good though. And the important part about these cabin community committees is that they are going to be comprised of members of the greater community, as well as potentially members of those cabin communities, but working together with the service provider to make sure that the facility is run well and that it is a good neighbor for the community, and that it is, again, becomes successful in both senses of the word. The other thing is we still don't have a service provider yet. I am very hopeful that we will get one soon. And my hope is that, and my intention, once we get a service provider on board, we get these cabin community committees together, we're also going to have more meetings like this. We're going to have more interactive meetings where we can work with that service provider so you can get a lot of specific answers to the kinds of questions that only a service provider can answer and that I know are on the minds of many of you. The real nuts and bolts operational questions. So that's going to happen soon. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me and with all of us today, and your willingness to work collaboratively on this issue and productively on this issue. And please know, as your council member, I want to work with you. I want to have your back. I want this to be successful for you, for the homeless, and for our city. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you have a happy holiday. Stay safe, stay healthy. Take care.